So what we're going to try to do today is talk to you a little bit about how to simplify change management. And a lot of you may be thinking, we've got change management licked. We don't have a problem at all with that. But a lot of you may be saying, because when we go out and we talk to some of the customers, they're typically overly optimistic about where they are with their change process. And even though change has been around for a long time, the whole ITSM tool sets, there's been a lot of different tool sets, and we of course work with Remedy, we work with Remedy Force, we work with Footprints, and they all have very good change processes in there. But typically, you still need a little bit of instruction as to what to do. So that's the purpose of this webinar, is to give you some sort of an idea, and that's really why we have Nikki on here, is that she's the expert and she can certainly help you get there. I wanted to start off, and many of you are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer goes something like this. It says, Father, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, Nikki, would you say that's a good definition of change management?
Well, I think that we need to go one step further with that, and I would add, and this is for a lot of people, especially the people on the front lines of IT, they also need the patience to go through the process and receive the required approvals for the changes that need to be made. That's a big part of change management. If we look at the change management activities as outlined here in these 9 steps, 2 of them are related to authorization of changes and getting the appropriate levels of approval. We can all think of examples of times, especially for some large profile organizations, where changes didn't go through the appropriate levels of approval, and there were devastating negative consequences.
Okay, so you've talked a little bit about why we care, because you read about all these these big servers that are going out. But let's talk a little bit about change management. What is change management, Dan?
So when we focus on change management, we look at the goals of what change management is intended to do within the organization. So change management essentially is how we it's the process by which we review and authorize changes within the IT infrastructure. We want to be sure that we are focusing, of course, on benefits to the business, and we want to optimize the risk. What I mean here by optimizing the risk is we can never eliminate the risk altogether. And for some organizations, if you're looking at, for example, a sales organization that wants to implement a new Salesforce automation tool, they may see, the IT may focus on, there's a 30% that this particular implementation might fail. It's a little bit too risky for us. Whereas the sales organization might say, hey, that's a 70% chance of success for us. The benefits certainly outweigh the risks, and we want to move forward with the project. So it's important to be able to take on a certain amount of risk and optimize that or mitigate it as much as possible. Something very important here, the 3rd bullet point, documenting the guidelines. Even within the ITIL framework, change management isn't that narrowly defined. It doesn't say, for example, what levels of approval you have to have for what services, but it does indicate that you should have very clearly documented guidelines. In order to simplify it within the organization, I would say that that's one of the biggest things that we often miss, is making sure that everybody is aware of the process and how it's supposed to work.
Okay. Well, Nikki, let me tell a little story here. We've been doing change management and, of course, configuration management at a big customer of ours down at Fort Belvoir. And what they've done is they have a product called ADDM, and so we go out and discover what's out on their network, and then we tie it into CMDB, so we know exactly where everything is, and we reconcile it on a regular basis. So they have a very good idea, and it saved them a terrific amount of money. But the thing that they've done is that they've hooked change management up to their ITSM system, so that if something gets discovered out there on the network and there's no change request, then an alert goes off. So I think that's what's known as integrated change, configuration, incident, and problem management. Is that correct?
Right, and I would say that especially in that case, and I've worked a little bit with that project, when you're looking at the inputs and outputs, so within the IDLE framework, this is really a full life cycle for the services within IT, and you look at it from each of the 5 phases of the life cycle. And within the service transition phase, I would say that of all of the processes here, change and configuration management are really the closest. They're very closely tied together and intertwined. And in implementations, those are the 2 processes I would say that I see most often implemented together because of the dependencies between the 2. And it goes both ways. So you mentioned this is the classic example or the classic equation in the IDLE framework is that the baseline, so if you take a baseline of your assets within your CMDB, the baseline of that asset, or of course as we call it a CI or configuration item, the baseline of that CI plus any approved changes to that CI needs to equal the current state of that CI. So if I do an exception report to see what has changed within my infrastructure, I better have those approved change requests to back up the changes that have been made. If I don't have those approved changes, then those have been unauthorized changes and additional investigation will be required. Likewise, the opposite is true. When I go to make a change, it's important to have the background or the data from my CMDB, from my configuration management database, also called a CMS or configuration management system. It's important that I have that data to help me make good, informed decisions. That applies for incident management, for problem management, but I would say most importantly for change management.
Okay, Nikki.
And looking at, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, go ahead. You can finish your thought there.
What I was going to go a little bit further and say was to talk about some of the activities around change management. So I mentioned this risk and impact analysis and assessment. That's the phase where we really, in change management, rely most heavily on the CMDB. And that information, of course, feeds back. So when we actually go into the implementation of the change, that then feeds back to the CMDB and informs other people of, for example, if there is a change window. So if I have a window during which this particular CI is going to be changed, it can inform if there is a call, for example, about that particular item or that particular asset, then I should be able to very easily see what the disruption is. Oh, a change is being made, and that's that kind of closed loop. That's how we get that. We inform both sides of the equation.
Okay. Nikki, let's talk a little bit about change types and concepts now. And I think you experience change management firsthand because oftentimes we'll be asked to come on site and work with a customer to upgrade their ITSM software. Maybe we're going to do a change implementation. Maybe it'll be problem. Maybe it'll be service request management, something like that. And we show up and we find out that there actually has been no change request made, believe it or not. And somebody might point us to a server and say, go ahead, have at it, right? How often does that happen? And if somebody forgets, what can they do? Isn't there an emergency change that can take care of what they forgot to do in the first place?
Right. So one of my jobs actually as a program manager is to have planning sessions to make sure that doesn't happen. So we try to get the specifications outlined and sometimes I'll even prompt my customer and say, if you need to get this equipment approved from your change advisory board, please make sure we have enough advance time and so on. But so really to drink your own champagne, as the saying goes, so that we're following these processes that we advocate for our customers. Sometimes, though, it does happen even during the course of an implementation where there may have been something that was not anticipated, and because they have us working, we have a consultant on site perhaps who may not be able to wait to the following week when the Change Advisory Board meets. So there are some times when it's even necessary for us to push for emergency changes. Again, I'll go back to the one of my first rules in simplifying change management is just making sure that the guidelines for each of these types of changes are documented. And sometimes for emergency changes, a change may need to happen and the change approval or the change documentation happens after the emergency change has been implemented. Critical piece always is that it is documented for historical reporting purposes. To get a little bit more into the what the Change Advisory Board does, I find that sometimes people get confused a little bit between normal and standard changes. Most people understand what an emergency change is, but one way that I describe it is a standard change is a change that does not necessarily need to go before the Change Advisory Board. So that's a little way of clarification there for the Change Advisory Board. But for all normal changes, it's important that we understand that there is a Change Advisory Board. For most organizations with whom I've worked or with which I've worked, they meet either once every week or every 2 weeks. And there is a need, especially if you're utilizing an IT service management tool, to be able to record a backout or remediation plan, to have a schedule of outages so that you know what your blackout periods are, for example, and also to see a forward schedule of changes to see if your change might conflict with another change that's happening within the infrastructure.